Presto, another episode of Two Guys in a Cloud. And Bob, I think today we're very fortunate because we have a third guy in our cloud. We have guy number 3 for today, and that's Todd Pecketts. Welcome, Todd Pecketts.
Welcome, Todd. Yay.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. I'm excited to be here with you.
We're very happy to have you. For those that are listening, I will just provide a real quick intro to Todd, and then, of course, turn the mic back to Todd so he can very fairly elaborate. Todd is a teammate of myself and Bob at Insight. Todd is responsible for our Microsoft Professional Services Group in the commercial side of the business, which what that means is that Todd's been in the business for an awfully long time, is very, very smart, and works with an awful lot of very smart people to help our clients that are, generally speaking, 6,000 seats and below, enable the cloud, enable the Microsoft stack. But that just covers a whole bunch of ground. And Todd, I know I'm not giving you enough credit in saying that. So yeah, please feel free to elaborate where I missed there.
Sure. Well, I'm also humble, so I don't consider myself that smart. I'm learning every day like our customers out there. But I do appreciate that. Not giving away my age, I've been doing this for a little over 30 years. I started my career really in disaster recovery and business continuity. And as we move into the cloud, or many of us are already in the cloud for a while, but clearly with the current pandemic that we're all experiencing, the cloud has become a key enabler for us. And I feel like my experience in the disaster world translates really well to what we're experiencing today, because I think nobody's really had a plan for not necessarily being in their office facilities for an extended period of time. And this is creating lots of new opportunities as well as new challenges.
Yeah, and I think, I've always found that you do an excellent job at weaving together all the different facets out there. It's very easy for, I think, somebody like, me to talk in terms of concept, hey, we could take this business model and we can make it, this much better if we use the cloud, quote unquote, or, we can bring this much more value to market, which will be ultimately what we're going to talk about today. But I end up taking for granted, which you're always very good about, is pausing and saying, there's a lot of different facets here. It's, and that includes things like security, and other things that aren't just about the, I would say just the very traditional thought of the cloud. Does that make sense? I know you talk about this all the time, and it's always thought-provoking to me.
I do, and I have a couple of slogans that I constantly banter about that I think really sum up things. For our customers, they're in many cases, or in almost every case, are focused on productivity, right? No matter what they do, whether they're a car dealer and they're selling cars, or they're a hospital and they're servicing patients, it's about productivity. And I tell them productivity goes synonymous with digital safety. And digital safety is an interesting term, because a lot has changed in a very short time for many of our customers. And one of the biggest challenges continues to be security. And as we move out of our traditional confines of our data center and our office, where we kind of have, tight controls, although it's a false sense of security being in a location, a lot of this has now changed. So as we move out of that traditional work environment and operate completely remotely, alert fatigue is the new reality. And so I start to talk to customers. And so I kind of say, as we look at the cloud, right, and there are two pieces of the cloud that I'm very excited about. One is really security, and the other side of it is really productivity and collaboration. And, that's really what the cloud is about. It's about the productivity and the collaboration. The security layer that kind of encompasses and envelops everything that we do is so critical to ensure that we can remain productive.
Yep. So, perfect. And then, I think one of the things, I know, what we want to talk about today is, how does the cloud help us bring greater value to the market in general? And then I think it's how does it helping us do that in this era of Corona? Because I think, and this was, Bob, this was your idea, and I think an excellent one, in the sense that, I think this age of Corona has forced us to rethink how we do even the most traditional things. And, in doing that, one of the ways we're able to facilitate a new vision is through the cloud. There's a billion ways for us to talk through that. And, I'd come to the conversation with a couple of examples, but Bob, maybe you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, I actually have a recent experience I wanted to share with you guys. But first, a question. Elliot, I believe you've done some air travel since we've had COVID. Todd, have you
Uh-huh.
done any
I
air travel?
I have not,
Okay.
fortunately or unfortunately.
Okay. No, yeah, I think it's both. So actually, a recent experience I had just a week ago was my first experience flying from Orlando to Phoenix for a friend's wedding. And it was interesting, right? Because, like you said, Todd, the world has changed from a COVID and business standpoint. The airport is clearly not as busy as it was in the past, which is good. And the airlines, and when you're on the flight, you're wearing a mask for 5, 6, 7 hours, depending on how long your trip is, which is interesting. But what I really started to feel is once I got to the hotel, and this was a pretty expensive hotel, 4 or 5 star level, and we get there, and the whole experience is different, right? You're still paying a high rate, but there's obviously no in-room cleaning service, which makes a lot of sense. But what really got to me was, the things like there was no beverage service, there was no room service, the restaurant is closed. The things that you get used to from a traveling COVID standpoint is not there. I woke up early because it was a time change for me and went to the gym to work out, and there's a message from the governor that the gym is closed. So it's really interesting to me how industries and the markets during COVID have changed their rules, are slimming down. There was one person really working behind this the staff, and it's just very interesting that COVID is now really affecting everything from business travel to technology, and the services and expectations that we have are completely different than it was 6 months ago.
So, Bob, I want to just draw a quick parallel to that.
Please.
And, Microsoft about 2 years ago developed a strategy around zero trust. And, we wear our masks and we operate today in a zero trust model because we assume that everybody that we come in contact with potentially is a carrier. And we also assume that we're potentially a carrier. And everything that we do and everything that we touch today, we're thinking COVID.
Right.
And the Microsoft Zero Trust model really assumes that everything that we do is corrupt in terms of our asset may be compromised, like our laptop or our phone. Our network may be compromised. Our application that we're using may be compromised. So it's interesting that you notice that because, there's really a close parallel. Unfortunately, what we'll see is in the zero trust model, we put things in place and then we start to rely on that. And I think I'm hopeful that the pandemic comes to a conclusion very soon, like everybody else. But we're going to have to become more comfortable with the fact that we don't trust anything. We're going to have to take those precautions. So it's an interesting parallel that I draw from that.
And this is where I think that there's tension in the conversation, because not in this one, but just in the whole, dialogue as it relates to the, Corona and, innovation during a time of Corona. I hear Bob's story, and, frankly, I blame the folks that are managing that hotel. The reality is that in any capital market, there are challenges. Sometimes there are profound challenges, right? And Corona is clearly a profound challenge, but it's incumbent on the business owner, the entrepreneur, whoever's got the profit motive, to innovate. That's the truth. There will be a hotel out there that innovates within the construct of Corona that says, okay, look, we can't demand the same rates for our rooms, as Bob was saying before, if we don't provide the same level of value, right? So
That's right.
Today, so they're not providing the same value. Why are you paying the same rates? That makes no sense, right?
That's right. I felt like I was not getting the value that I had paid for.
Right. And, And so what has to happen is that, there will be a hotel, whether it exists today or not, that figures out a way to provide an enhanced level of value within the construct of Corona, being attentive to the security concerns as an example, or whatever the restrictions are, and I have a hard time hearing something like zero trust, but I get it. I mean, like, yeah, you got to have that mindset, but I get it, but at the same time, there has to be a fabric between innovation and within that innovation's sensitivity to vulnerabilities, right? So I think that's what's at play. I mean, I think that's a perfect triangulation of the issues, right? And, I think there is, okay, so what are companies doing today to be attentive to both sides, of that? And, honestly, like one easy low hanging piece of fruit, and this is just to spark the conversation, not to labor here, but insight. I mean, one of the things that our company did very early on was develop, a platform that, I think we call it the connected platform for detection and prevention, right? And in essence, it's, what I would call, an architecture, architected solution that's comprised of, smart devices and, using artificial intelligence. I think it's within Azure, just surveillance cameras, a number of other components to help us in our offices maintain a certain standard of security, safety within the era of Corona. And then, of course, we provide this to certain customers, right? And it's a way for us to offer an in-office experience, but be secure at the same time, leveraging technology. And in this case, I think Azure, I think artificial intelligence. But, again, that's just to sort of kickstart it. But I think that there's many examples of that, or there should be.
Yep. And I would add to that, right? Just putting on my technologist hat for a moment, there are some great things that are accessible today in the Azure platform and with technology that allow you to capture sentiment. So, if I were running that hotel, right, I'd want to see the sentiment of my my customers. If I see if I'm able to get some immediate feedback, and I'm able to then collaborate with my designers and architects, maybe there are things that I can do to enhance that experience. And at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter what industry you're in, right? We're hypersensitive to the end user experience. And whether that's our customer or that's the customer of our customer, right? That is the goal. And technology can really help with ensuring that that experience is what needs to happen. And the reality is it's got to change and it's got to grow, because every day there's a new challenge for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's difficult just in regular times for companies to look at innovation and try to make investments there. And then when you have a pandemic, it's even harder because you're probably losing revenue. You're trying to stay afloat and you're trying to figure out what is next. But this pandemic has really forced companies to innovate.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's forced companies to think about different ways to do things, maybe even better or different than they have in the past. And I use my example as one that I think, to your point, Elliott, that needs to happen, right? Companies need to look at different ways, right? Employees are working from home now, mostly. That's probably not a bad thing, right? You can reduce real estate costs, you can reduce office space, you can do everything that goes with owning space and having employees work remotely. And it's probably better, more productive for your employees to do that anyway. So this is a new world for so many different companies, and innovating and finding the ways to do things maybe a little bit better, a little bit different is a challenge to a lot of companies out there, but it's something that needs to be done because we're forcing it, right? It's kind of like how the retailers are today. They're being forced to have more online presence. The malls of all across America are dying because we're losing these big retailers. They've got to innovate. They've got to find new ways.
Mm-hmm.
Well, don't forget digital transformation. You hear, this is, I'm sure if you watch any of the, major analysts or any of the technology leaders, they'll tell you we're seeing 5 years of innovation and transformation occur in less than 5 months.
Right.
And that's a significant driver. And you're totally right. For many of our customers, they, at the end of the day, right, they'll come out of this better than when they got in it, with a lot of pain. And yes, there's innovation, and those drivers, you started your conversation about saying, there's no, it's very hard to have an investment to drive innovation. But if you flip the other side of that, right, you have an opportunity now to really focus on the things that are necessary, that are critical, and innovate around those so that they become your differentiator, and they help you survive and weather the storm and come out of it in a much better position than where you started.
Yeah. You know what it kind of reminds me of? I mean, we've all, again, not to date ourselves, but I remember working during the late 90s, super late 90s, like I think 98, 97, as the internet was just, really becoming a thing. And there were all these, what we probably today call envisioning sessions or, visualization sessions, because nobody understood it. Nobody knew. They knew that there was this thing called the internet, and they knew that it could help them, become more profitable. At the very least, they knew that if they went public and they could attach the internet to their narrative, they'd make more money. But there was all of these, blank canvas conversations. I call them that, like that blank canvas whiteboard type conversation where you're starting from scratch. And I almost feel like we're there again, where we're starting from scratch again, in the sense that we have to sort of pause, hit the reset button, and, rethink how our traditional business goes to market, because the market is radically different, and that's, and I find those conversations very fascinating. But, then again, there's all these different elements to it. So, along those lines, one of the things that I was thinking about, and this will maybe give us a chance to talk security a bit, which I know is definitely part and parcel with all this, is that as we get into these distributed environments, right, you talk about employees moving into distributed workforces, or all of us, kind of becoming much more autonomous. It's very conducive to the cloud. And then part of the value that the cloud brings is the data aggregation of our experiences. And then let's call it, the artificial intelligence component. Like, for example, I think about retail, in the sense that, now retail space is at risk, right? So, then we get much more into the online retail experience, which, there's this huge shift of the consumer behavior into the online retail experience. And then there's all the data that is part of that, and now all the artificial intelligence that's part of it. And as a result, we get this more nuanced, intuitive retail experience online. But at the same time, there's all this privacy risk tied to it. So, as more and more data shifts to the cloud, that whole pendulum impacts as well in terms of privacy and privacy risk. How do you like even begin to have that conversation, Todd? Where do you go with that?
Yeah, so privacy risk is really an important concept, and that really aligns to compliance. And so, as we shift to remote everything, safety and security is really key, and privacy is part of that continuum. And on top of this approach, identity is really the key component, right? You have to have a strong identity strategy. Strong cloud identity is the key to that zero trust model that I was talking about. Digital trust and privacy is really encompassed in that whole model. So compliancy is more important than ever, and users are creating, they're accessing, and they're storing critical data in new ways in this age of COVID, and DLP policies are critical. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about Microsoft, because that's really what my bread and butter is, but Microsoft's really leading that effort, and they're incorporating cloud app security with digital leakage protection, or DLP. And so what does that mean? You really have a compliance manager that provides a risk-based scoring to help the customer understand where they are at any given time. And since this landscape is changing every day, right, those scores change every day, and being able to get your arms around it is critical. We also recommend that you use like a SIM tool, right, for event management and incident management, something like Sentinel. And there's also something called XDR now that Microsoft is driving, and that's the extended detection and response tool set. And this approach is something I talk to a lot of clients about, and it really helps them take advantage of the 8 trillion, you got it, you heard it right, 8 trillion signals that are created every day, right? So, Microsoft is monitoring those 8 trillion signals per day, and they're using artificial intelligence and machine learning to help correlate these low fidelity signals that even 6 months ago would have been impossible to understand or really be able to detect and take advantage of. So, we take a look at that, and then we add to that equation the new Defender platform, which really brings it all together. It brings identity, cloud app security, device, cloud infrastructure, networking, and IoT all under this one window. And, to extend to customers that have on-prem infrastructures, because not everybody is fully in the cloud, Azure Defender also has the ability to include SQL and on-prem instances in the overall threat prevention, detection, and response methodology. So we see all those pieces tied together, and privacy is really key in there, because today people are using devices in their home. They're using devices that may not have necessarily been a corporate asset in the beginning, but now in the age of COVID, companies are sending laptops that are brand new and building, basic security profiles. But now we have devices that we have our Facebook, and we may have, WhatsApp and all these other applications. And how do you allow people to have privacy but also have security? And you have to have a really strong strategy that understands how people operate, because we have to still operate our lives. We're still working from home, and life goes on. So that's definitely a key thing.
So I want to connect the dots on a couple things, right? So, I think what you just outlined there, very important, and I think what it speaks to is how an enterprise or how a company or an organization protects the data that it's the, shepherd of. Right. So, it's like data's coming into my organization because of the service that I provide, or, the interaction that my employees have with customers. However you want to frame it, that's where the data is coming from. And I am protecting that data through these methods that you're talking about. Right. I think separate from that is this notion of I'm a consumer, I'm an individual, and there's a sense of trust or not that I'm implying when I engage technology. So example, so we all hear about TikTok, right? This video platform. And by the way, to me, that's an outcome of Corona, in the sense that, we're all now isolated. We're all by ourselves. We're all distributed. Of course, video is, going to be prevalent. It's a way for us to connect with others. TikTok is an exact expression of Corona, as far as I'm concerned, because it's a way for society to connect with each other. But of course, what we all know is that, TikTok has got some robust artificial intelligence behind it, is able to pick up very discrete patterns of human or consumer behavior. They're able to correlate to individuals. There's a lot of concern about the fact that that's, held by a foreign country. I will skip that part of the narrative. But, in essence, it occurs to me that, there is an opportunity for companies to market themselves as a secure entity, to provide greater levels of trust in the marketplace. And that to me is also value. So to circle it back to value, right? So, if I'm really truly concerned about privacy and the data that I impart as a consumer, I'm going to be more interested in working with companies that commit a certain level of secure posture, because, I'm going to know that my data is safe with them, and that's value, right? And I don't know if companies really do that. I think companies make investments in security today because, of liability, or they need to, or they're worried about what could happen. But I think that it also could be pivoted and turned into a value proposition in the marketplace today, if done correctly.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, and that is a reasonable way to look at it. And many of our customers are looking at it that way as well, because, like I said, the new world is very different than the world we had 6 months ago or 8 months ago. And we have to look at it a little bit differently. And it's interesting, the world is becoming a little bit simpler, in that, we start to see, and again, I talk about Microsoft, but we start to see Microsoft now supporting Android and Apple, iOS and Mac OS in a much more consolidated way. And why? Because people's behavior and their patterns and their personal preferences really drive how they operate. And we cannot no longer live in a monochromatic world where we say everything lives in this place, this neat little box, and everything has to fit that model. That's not how we live. That's not how we work. and we have to be a little bit more open to having people work the way they want, where they want, with what they want. And that introduces lots of complexity. But at the end of the day, productivity is the key. So you've got to find a way to balance the privacy elements of what we do individually and the imperatives that our organizations require, which is, security and control. And it's always a balancing act. And I don't care if it's days of Corona, if it's a year ago, 10 years ago, it's always been a balancing act. It's just now it's a lot more complicated. And thankfully, there are more tools at our disposal to simplify that.
Agreed.
Todd, I got a quick question. If you're in an organization and you're looking from a security standpoint, how much money do you really need to invest and put towards IT security? For example, I think about like Detroit could make a safe car, but it would be so expensive no one would buy it. So where does companies find that line from spending the right amount of money on a security platform or strategy versus overspending?
So, this is the thing. There is no formula. You can't say, hey, I'm going to take 20% of my total IT budget and put it towards security. There is no golden magic number.
Okay.
I think it's very important to also, I tell my customers constantly, right, progress over perfection, right? And, perfection, I talk to some customers and we'll sit down, we'll whiteboard, and all of a sudden, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars of investment to achieve their goal of risk mitigation. And, they get paralyzed. And I tell customers all the time, right, don't make perfect the enemy of good. And so progress can happen every day in small quantities. If you're Office 365 and you increase your protection to, let's say, from an E3 to E5, right, you're layering in layers of progress that ultimately will lead you closer to perfection, but you're not necessarily having to spend a truckload of money. And especially in COVID days, there's not a lot of excess cash for most companies to plop into things that may not necessarily get them immediate gains in terms of their outcome or their production. So again, progress over perfection. You don't have to spend everything and get 100%, but security and our model today is all around incremental increases. And the way to do that is really making progress. It's a journey. You'll never be fully secure. You'll never be fully optimized. You'll never be able to be 100% collaboration in the optimal setting, but you have to make steps in that direction, and progress is the key there.
Nice. Thank you.
The one of the, just a quick pivot a bit, so I'm thinking that, where a lot of innovation value is going to come from in, today's world is through startups. Through new companies that, it'll be easier for them to take a blank slate or whiteboard or however we phrased it and go after a market because they see an opportunity, right? So like, for example, if I had a product today, I would not, work with the store. I mean, put it into a typical retail experience. I go straight, online as an example. Then there's many other ways to look at this. One of the benefits that the cloud clearly provides startups is the ability to create their solution in an incremental way, without the big, large capital investments, which is, what were barriers to startups in the past. In the past, if I was going to create whatever I had to create, I had to get a whole bunch of capital to, build a data center or, get an office or, today that's not the case. My workforce can be remote and the systems or, whatever web-based, internet-based, environment I want to prop up, I can do it all through the cloud. And I think many people are familiar with the fact that the cloud gives you that in terms of things like virtual servers and infrastructure. I think there's a natural understanding of that. And we've talked a bit about that in prior episodes. But what the cloud also provides is the ability to architect solutions, and I hesitate to say software environments because it's more than that, right? But, things like containers come to mind, or, when I think about commerce, I think about blockchain, but containers in particular, right? And I would love if you could, Todd, if you could help people understand how you could leverage, and I call it platform as a service, Azure as an example, and elements such as containers to create, business systems in a way that's incremental. So I don't have to pay for everything up front, but I can build it over time in an iterative experience.
Yeah, so I probably would pivot off of the container discussion for a moment, and I hear what you're asking and saying, and I think there are a couple of other major things that impact that. And really what you're talking about is operational costs versus capital expense. And that is truly what the cloud brings, right? Just in time consumption. But what really adds to that equation is the GitHub repository that has a lot of reusable code, and the integration of open source technology that now is certainly been embraced by many of the major players like Microsoft, that really allows you to take advantage of things that have been developed already, and customize it and have access to API architecture that really gives you a leg up, so that the things that once upon a time would take you a development cycle of multiple iterations and many months, to now a very quick cycle turnaround with reusing a lot that's out there, really helps innovation. It drives innovation. We have a great digital innovation team within Insight that is leading world class, and we take advantage of those types of advances, and our customers clearly have the same opportunity to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, the better controls that we have allow us to optimize what we're using and when we're using it. So just like you talked about platform as a service, being able to spike your utilization and take advantage of more technology at your fingertips when in demand requires it, is really the way that most companies now are able to control their costs. They don't have to go and buy racks of systems and data centers and gobs of bandwidth waiting for people to come. You can innovate quickly with the technology that's out there today. Dynamics is a great platform where we see lots of commerce taking rapid advantage. The cloud is a key element to make that happen. And then access to information. I mean, never before did anybody have at their fingertips this rich ecosystem to draw from. So all those things together, and aligning to a tighter security model, makes it possible for you to take something from concept to production in a very, very short period of time. So that is definitely a key.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate what you said there. And, I think in terms of building blocks, particularly in the beginning, when you talk about things like GitHub and so forth, that, the building blocks are just bigger. I mean, you're not starting from scratch, and, it's much faster to build the house because, the bricks are bigger, right? So I always have to bring things down to very simple terms, but that's sort of how I see it. And then, being able to, power the house through, paying for what I use as opposed to paying up front. All that makes perfect sense. I mean, I think to me, it's exciting times. I mean, I think, having the luxury of being around for some time, you see that this is just a rife moment in time for innovation and, really having that entrepreneurial hat if you choose to do it, and there are definitely entrepreneurs out there, that will take advantage of this moment. And 10 years from now, we'll look back and say, yep, that's when it started. That's when such and such did such and such. And that's why they're where they are today. Guarantee that's happening right now.
Yeah, I echo your sentiments, and I certainly the human side of me feels terrible for what many of us, or if not all of us, are experiencing today. But on the flip side of that, this is the most exciting time in my career from a technology perspective. The rapid changes and the opportunity for us to do things differently, and help our customers do things better, is to me the best part of what's going on. And like I said, as we come through the end of this and we move forward, I think it is an enhancement for all of us experiencing what we've experienced. We're never going to go back, right? Things will never be the same. I think they'll be better. And in that with that, in mind, right, I'm very excited about how things are going for us as an org and for the things that we're doing for our customers.
Yep. Yep. And it's hard. I mean, I think that you have to balance the narrative in your head, and it seems that when it comes to, you know, just society in general, many of the great accomplishments of humanity have been the outcomes of some of our biggest tragedies, and we, history helps us look at these things in different ways. And I think your points there are very thoughtful. I think it's real. So, okay, but here's a question for you, because I know that I said containers before, and I would love for you to I know it's not specific to the way I premised it, but can you help me understand containers a bit better? Because I've heard it bounced around and I think I get it, but not really.
Yeah, so I could probably spend a couple hours talking about containerization and what that model does, but it really is around scale and being able to create an environment that you can rapidly develop around and deploy and manage to scale. Really gives you an opportunity to create a very simple approach to implementation, and then be able to cookie cutter that and quite frankly innovate around that. So I could probably, if you'd like, we could probably spend another segment on containerization. I've got a couple of my teammates that are experts in the area. We definitely see containerization as an enabling technology, but it's more of a process. It's more of creating a simplified ecosystem to manage and to be able to scale. So I probably, without necessarily talking about how we're decoupling critical elements and standardizing on some of the core components of the operating system, containerization is a fairly straightforward concept, and it's not that far from the virtualization space that we know, but it's a creation of a methodology and a core component that allows you to be able to reproduce that and scale that at mass and manage it simply as well.
Got it. So let's call that the teaser for the container episode in the future. Yeah. Excellent. So, I guess, let me ask you, Bob, with everything that you're hearing or that we're talking about from a economic perspective, where do you see the implications, I guess?
Well, it's really a couple different things, right? It's important to understand what that cost of innovation is, and I think people get scared of innovation, like we talked about earlier, because of the cost. But when you move to the cloud, sometimes, to be honest with you, the cloud isn't always cheaper. And customers need to realize that it's different, but it may be a way to innovate some different areas and do it quicker, like Todd was speaking. So if you pick up a workload and you just plop it into the cloud, you may not save any money versus the way you're running it today. But you need to think about things in a different way now. And from an economic standpoint, you need to rethink your business, how your customers are doing work, how you're touching different customers, how your IT runs, how your data center runs, how your cloud apps run. And there's so many different ways to do it, and putting a strong strategy around that, whether you're innovating, you're optimizing, is so important today, maybe more important than it's ever been, so that customers can start containing costs and really understand what that budget is. Many clients today are concerned about the cost of the cloud because it's a variable cost to them. It goes up, it goes down, it very rarely stays steady. So how do we really get to that steady, optimized state? And that's something that we all have to work on, because it is going to be a moving target. The cloud is not the Wild West, and some people think it is. And it's important that we put structure and some financial accountability around that, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I think that all makes perfect sense. And so what I got out of that is it's not a straight path, right? That
It's not.
It's not saying, hey, I'm going to the cloud, therefore it's cheaper. although there may be certain economic benefits at certain times, but a lot of it relates to what's the strategic notion behind what you're doing. And in that construct, it may be that the cloud's perfect because of your strategic intent. So it really kind
That's
of
right.
it is about the intent very often. And then I think a lot of it is about the expertise, right? Understanding if I've got this workload and I'm moving this workload to the cloud, what's the best way for me to do that? Because there may be a more cost-effective way to do that. It's like anything else.
That's
Knowledge
right.
matters. Yeah,
You
I
know,
get that.
aging myself a little bit, I think of it kind of like when the .com era was going, right?
Hmm.
Traditional businesses knew that they needed a website, but they didn't know how they were going to do it. What are they
Yeah,
how are they going to reach their customers? What value is it going to bring to me? But I know I got to have one. So, that's a little bit like what the cloud is today. Oh, are you on the cloud? I got to get to the cloud. Make sure you have a good strategy once you get there, right?
right. Agreed. Agreed. All right. Excellent. So, well, in some parting thoughts here, Todd, just as you kind of look into the crystal ball, what are you most excited about as it relates to our world? And, really it could be anything. Just feel free to, do your thing.
Well, the things that I'm pretty jazzed about is the ability for us to just be able to take a lot more data and get some intelligence out of it. I'm sort of a numbers guy and a data guy. Um, and I would actually like to leave this conversation with a couple of key components. I just had a meeting with a customer, very strategic customer, and they basically, asked me for, a couple of key points. And I kind of netted it out to 4 key points in terms of their current position and what they really need to be focused on as table stakes in this world. And I tell them, you got to use MFA or multi-factor authentication. You've got to keep your software current and up to date and patched. You've got to make sure that you understand and that you have inventory of all the things that are running in your network. And you got to track the progress of your secure score and your compliance scores, right? Those 4 things are the things that I tell every customer as a best practice. And I realize you asked me for a more generic, like, what am I thinking? But I feel like it's my obligation anytime I have the ear of anybody who's listening to ensure that I bring out those 4 points, because those, I think, are the 4 points that are really the things that'll help us survive where we are now and thrive as we move forward.
Yeah, good thoughts. Excellent. So I guess with that, Bob, I'm thinking this may wrap up yet another episode of Two Guys in the Cloud.
It sure does. Thank you, Todd, for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.